What kind of person screams at a child for dropping a fly ball? The late afternoon sun burned over the dusty baseball field, casting long shadows as the crowd's chatter faded into a tense hush. Karen, a heavy-set woman with a face twisted in perpetual disdain, stood at the edge of the bleachers, her voice slicing through the air like a blade. "You're pathetic. My dog could catch better than you," she bellowed, pointing at Tommy, a scrawny 12-year-old whose shoulders slumped as he stood frozen in left field. The other kids on the team, the Wildcats, shifted uncomfortably, their cleats scuffing the dirt. Parents in the stands exchanged uneasy glances, but no one spoke up. Karen's tirade continued, her words venomous, targeting Tommy's every move. "Why are you even out there? You're embarrassing everyone." Tommy's face burned red, his glove dangling at his side, as tears welled in his eyes. The game was supposed to be Funa Saturday Little League match, filled with laughter and the crack of bats. Instead, it had become a battlefield, and Karen was the general, wielding her cruelty like a weapon. Coach Mike, a broad-shouldered man with a weathered cap and a reputation for fairness, watched from the dugout. His jaw tightened as Karen's voice grew louder, now mocking Tommy's teammate, Lily, for missing a pitch. "You swing like a toddler. Go home." Karen sneered, her hands on her hips, oblivious to the growing discomfort around her. Mike had seen Karen at games before, always loud, always complaining. But this was different. She wasn't just heckling. She was tearing into these kids, stripping away their confidence with every word. He'd coached for years, seen parents get heated, but this was personal. Karen wasn't even a parent, she was a neighbor who showed up to support her friend's kid. But her version of support was a wrecking ball. Mike's hands clenched into fists. He couldn't let this go on. The crowd's silence was deafening, broken only by Karen's relentless taunts. Tommy's mother, Sarah, sat in the stands, her hands trembling as she gripped her purse. She wanted to scream back, to defend her son, but fear held her tongue. Karen had a reputation in their small town, a bully who thrived on intimidation, always ready to escalate. Sarah had seen her berate store clerks, shout at waiters, and now, she turned her venom on children. Sarah's heart pounded as she watched Tommy shrink under Karen's words, his dreams of hitting a home run crumbling into shame. She whispered to her husband, "We have to do something." But he shook his head, muttering about not wanting trouble. Mike, however, wasn't one to back down. He stepped out of the dugout, his boots kicking up dust as he walked toward the field. The game paused, the umpire glancing over, sensing the shift in the air. Mike's voice was calm but firm, cutting through Karen's rant. "Ma'am, that's enough." Karen spun toward him, her eyes narrowing, a smirk curling her lips. "Excuse me? I'm just telling it like it is. These kids are awful." Mike's gaze didn't waver. "You're not their coach. You're not even their parent. You're a guest here, and you're out of line." The crowd held its breath, waiting for Karen's response. She laughed, a harsh, grating sound, and stepped closer to Mike. "You're gonna tell me how to act? I'll say what I want. Free country, right?" The tension crackled like static before a storm. Mike's eyes flicked to Tommy, who was staring at the ground, and Lily, who clutched her bat like a lifeline. He knew this wasn't just about one game, it was about every kid who'd ever been made to feel small, every moment of joy stolen by someone like Karen. He took a deep breath, his voice steady. "You're done here. Leave the field or I'll have you removed." Karen's face flushed, her smirk fading into a scowl. She wasn't used to being challenged, and it showed. She opened her mouth to retort, but Mike raised a hand, silencing her. "Not another word. You're scaring these kids. Go." Karen didn't budge. Instead, she doubled down, her voice rising to a shout. "You think you're some big hero, huh? These kids need to toughen up. The world doesn't coddle losers." The words hit like a slap, and Tommy flinched, his glove dropping to the dirt. Sarah stood up in the stands, her fear giving way to anger, but before she could speak, another voice cut through the chaos. It was Lily's older brother, Jake, a quiet high schooler who'd been watching from the sidelines. "You're the loser," he said, his voice trembling but clear. "You're picking on kids half your size. What's wrong with you?" The crowd gasped, a ripple of shock spreading through the stands. Jake wasn't one to speak out, was shy, reserved, but something in him had snapped. Karen's head whipped toward Jake, her eyes blazing. "You little punk, you don't talk to me like that," she spat, taking a step toward him. Mike moved quickly, positioning himself between them, his presence a wall. "Back off," he said, his voice low and dangerous. The umpire signaled for security, and 2 volunteers from the league, burly men in polo shirts, started making their way over. Karen's confidence faltered, but she wasn't done yet. She pointed at Jake, then at Mike, her voice dripping with venom. "You're all gonna regret this. I know people. I'll have this whole team shut down." The threat hung in the air, absurd but chilling. Mike didn't flinch. He'd dealt with bullies before, and he knew their playbook: bluster, threats, anything to avoid accountability. He turned to the kids, who were watching wide-eyed from the field. "Tommy, Lily, you're doing great. Don't let her get to you. Keep playing." His words were a lifeline, pulling them back from the edge of humiliation. Tommy picked up his glove, his hands shaking but his chin lifting slightly. Lily nodded, gripping her bat tighter. The game resumed, but the air was thick with unresolved tension. Karen stood her ground, glaring at Mike, daring him to make the next move. What no one expected was the twist that came next. As the security volunteers approached, a woman in the stands stood up, her face pale but determined. It was Karen's sister, Ellen, who'd been sitting quietly, unnoticed until now. "Karen, stop," she said, her voice cracking. "You're embarrassing yourself. And me." The crowd turned, stunned. Ellen had always been in Karen's shadow, the quieter sibling who never challenged her. But now, she stepped forward, her hands clasped tightly. "You've been like this our whole lives, pushing people around, thinking you're better than everyone. These are kids. Kids, Karen. Leave them alone." Karen's face froze, her bravado cracking like glass. For a moment, she looked at Ellen, searching for the sister who always backed her up. But Ellen's eyes were unyielding. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Karen's armor began to crumble, her usual arrogance replaced by something raw and exposed. She opened her mouth, but no words came. The security volunteers reached her, their presence a silent ultimatum. Mike crossed his arms, his voice steady. "Last chance, Karen. Walk away or they'll make you." The standoff stretched on, every second heavy with anticipation. Karen's eyes darted from Mike to Ellen to the approaching volunteers, her world shrinking under the weight of her own actions. For the first time, she seemed to realize she wasn't in control. And that realization was only the beginning. The sun dipped lower, painting the field in hues of orange and gold. But the warmth did nothing to ease the chill of Karen's defiance. She stood rooted to the spot, her chest heaving, as the security volunteers flanked her. Their faces were stern, their hands resting lightly on their belts, a quiet signal of authority. Ellen's words still echoed, a betrayal Karen hadn't seen coming. Her sister's voice, usually soft and pliant, had cut deeper than any of Mike's warnings. The crowd watched, their murmurs growing as Karen's bravado wavered. She wasn't used to being cornered, and it showed in the way her hands twitched, searching for something to grasp her pride, her anger, anything to keep her upright. Mike stepped closer, his voice low but carrying the weight of the moment. "This isn't about you, Karen. It's about those kids. You've got one chance to make this right before it gets worse." Karen's eyes flashed with defiance, but there was a flicker of doubt, a crack in her armor. She glanced at the crowd, at the parents now whispering, at the kids on the field who were no longer just players but witnesses to her unraveling. Tommy stood in left field, his glove clutched tightly, watching her with a mix of fear and hope. Lily, still at the plate, looked to Mike, her small frame rigid with determination. They were waiting not just for the game to continue, but for justice, for someone to stand up for them. Karen laughed, but it was hollow, a sound that fooled no one. "You think you can humiliate me? I'm not going anywhere." She crossed her arms, planting herself like a monument to her own ego. But the security volunteers were unmoved, their presence a reminder that her threats held no power here. Ellen took a step closer, her face a mix of sorrow and resolve. "Karen, you're not just hurting these kids. You're hurting yourself. You've always been like this, lashing out, pushing people away. I can't watch it anymore." The words landed like a punch, and for a moment, Karen's face softened. A glimpse of the person she might have been before bitterness took root. But that moment passed. Karen's scowl returned, and she turned on Ellen, her voice venomous. "You're nothing without me. You think you can stand there and judge me? You're pathetic." The crowd gasped, the air growing heavier. Ellen flinched but didn't back down, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Mike raised a hand, cutting off Karen's tirade. "That's enough. You're leaving. Now." He nodded to the volunteers, who stepped closer, their intent clear. Karen's eyes widened, her bravado crumbling as the reality of consequences loomed. She wasn't just being asked to leave, she was being forced to face the weight of her actions. The twist deepened as another figure emerged from the stands. It was Mr. Thompson, the league president, a quiet man who rarely spoke at games but carried authority in his measured steps. He'd been watching from the back, unnoticed until now, his clipboard tucked under his arm. "Karen," he said, his voice calm but unyielding. "You're banned from league events. Effective immediately." The crowd erupted in whispers, shock rippling through the stands. A ban was rare, reserved for the worst offenses, and it hit Karen like a thunderbolt. Her mouth opened, then closed, her face paling as she realized the depth of her mistake. "You can't do that," she sputtered, her voice cracking. "I have rights." Thompson didn't blink. "You have the right to respect others, and you failed. We have a zero-tolerance policy for harassment. You've crossed the line." He pulled out his phone, showing her a video someone in the crowd had recorded Karen's tirade, every cruel word captured in crisp detail. The evidence was undeniable, a digital mirror reflecting her ugliness back at her. Karen's hands shook as she stared at the screen, her own voice mocking her from the recording. The crowd's whispers grew louder, a chorus of judgment she couldn't escape. Mike seized the moment, his voice rising so everyone could hear. "This isn't just about you leaving, Karen. It's about accountability. You don't get to tear down kids and walk away like it's nothing." He turned to the team, his eyes softening. "Tommy, Lily, you're stronger than her words. Don't ever forget that." The kids nodded, their faces brightening with a flicker of pride. Sarah, Tommy's mother, stood up in the stands, her voice trembling but clear. "Thank you, Coach. Thank you for standing up for my son." The crowd began to clap, a slow, steady rhythm that grew into applause. Karen's face burned, her world shrinking as the community turned against her. The volunteers moved closer, and Karen took a step back, her defiance crumbling into desperation. "Fine, I'll go," she muttered, her voice barely audible. But Mike shook his head. "Not yet. You owe these kids an apology. A real one. In front of everyone." The crowd fell silent, the weight of his demand settling over the field. Karen's eyes widened, her mouth working soundlessly. An apology? Publicly? It was the one thing she'd never done, the one thing that would strip away her armor completely. She looked to Ellen, hoping for a lifeline, but Ellen's face was stone, her silence a final rejection. The standoff stretched on, the air thick with anticipation. Karen's shoulders slumped, her hands falling to her sides. For the first time, she looked small, not the towering bully who dominated the field moments ago. The volunteers stood ready, Thompson's phone still in hand, the video a silent threat. Mike crossed his arms, his voice unwavering. "We're waiting, Karen." The crowd leaned forward, every eye on her, every heart pounding with the hope that justice would prevail. Tommy and Lily stood together on the field, their small figures a testament to resilience, waiting for the words that could heal the wounds Karen had inflicted. And then, in a moment that felt like the world holding its breath, Karen spoke. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely carrying. Mike shook his head. "Louder. They deserve to hear it." Karen's face twisted, her pride battling her fear, but the weight of the moment was too much. She cleared her throat, her voice shaking. "I'm sorry, okay? I shouldn't have said those things." The words were reluctant, grudging, but they were there, hanging in the air like a fragile truce. The crowd exhaled, a collective release of tension, but the battle wasn't over yet. The words hung in the air, brittle and unconvincing, but they were a start. Karen's apology, forced and grudging, landed like a stone in a still pond, sending ripples through the crowd. Tommy and Lily stood on the field, their faces a mix of relief and uncertainty, as if they couldn't quite believe the woman who'd torn them down was now eating her words. The sun had nearly set, the sky a deep amber, casting long shadows that stretched across the diamond. Mike's gaze never left Karen, his expression a mix of resolve and quiet triumph. He knew an apology wasn't enough, not yet, but it was a crack in the wall she'd built around herself, a wall that had hurt too many for too long. The crowd's applause had faded, replaced by a heavy silence. Parents whispered to each other, some nodding in approval, others still wary, as if waiting for Karen to lash out again. Ellen stood apart, her arms crossed, her face unreadable. She'd spent years in Karen's shadow, excusing her behavior, but this moment had changed something fundamental. Karen's eyes darted to her sister, searching for forgiveness, but Ellen's silence was louder than any words. The security volunteers remained close, their presence a reminder that Karen's time to act was running out. Thompson, the league president, tucked his phone away, but the video, the evidence of Karen's cruelty, loomed like a specter. Mike stepped forward, his voice steady but firm. That's a start, Karen, but it's not enough. You don't just get to say sorry and walk away. You need to understand what you've done. He gestured to Tommy and Lily, who stood together, their small frames a stark contrast to Karen's imposing figure. These kids are here to learn, to grow, to have fun. You took that from them. You made them feel like they didn't belong. Why? The question hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. Karen's mouth opened, then closed, her usual bravado nowhere to be found. For the first time, she had no quick retort, no defense to hurl back. The crowd leaned in, sensing the shift. Karen's face crumpled, not with remorse but with the dawning realization that she was alone. The people she'd counted on, her sister, her reputation, her ability to intimidate, had abandoned her. Sarah, Tommy's mother, found her voice again, stepping forward in the stands. My son's been practicing for weeks, trying so hard to make us proud. You had no right to make him feel worthless. Her words were raw, fueled by a mother's love and anger. Other parents nodded, their murmurs of agreement growing louder, a chorus of support for the kids and a rebuke to Karen's cruelty. Karen's hands shook, her eyes darting around the field, searching for an escape. But there was none. The volunteers stepped closer, their patience wearing thin. Thompson spoke again, his voice calm but final. You're not welcome here anymore, Karen, and if you try to come back, we'll involve the authorities. That video is enough to make a case for harassment. The word harassment hit like a gavel, and Karen flinched, the legal weight of her actions sinking in. She'd always thought she was untouchable, above consequences, but now the law was staring her down, as real as the dust under her feet. In that moment, something broke in Karen. Her shoulders slumped, her face drained of color. She wasn't the towering figure anymore, not the bully who could silence a room with a glare. She was just a woman, exposed and vulnerable, her cruelty laid bare for all to see. Mike saw a flicker of shame, the realization that she'd gone too far. He didn't let up. You don't get to walk away like nothing happened, he said. You're going to make this right, not just with words, but with actions. Start by leaving these kids alone forever. The crowd erupted in applause, louder this time, a wave of support that washed over the field. Tommy and Lily exchanged a glance, their faces softening with relief. They weren't just kids anymore. They were survivors, standing tall in the face of cruelty. Sarah rushed to the field, wrapping Tommy in a hug, whispering words of pride and love. Lily's parents followed, their arms around her, their smiles a shield against the memory of Karen's words. The team rallied around them, their chatter filling the air, the game resuming with a renewed energy. Karen turned to leave, her steps slow and unsteady, the weight of her actions dragging her down. Ellen watched her go, her expression a mix of sorrow and resolve. She'd lost her sister today, not to the crowd or the ban, but to the truth of who Karen had become. As Karen reached the edge of the field, she paused, looking back at the scene she'd caused, the kids playing again, the parents cheering, Mike standing tall in the dugout. For a moment, she seemed to see herself clearly, but the moment passed, and she walked away, her figure shrinking into the dusk. The game went on, the crack of the bat echoing as Tommy stepped up to the plate. He swung hard, the ball soaring into the outfield. A solid hit that brought cheers from the stands. Lily was next, her swing confident, her smile bright. The Wildcats played with a fire they hadn't had before, as if Karen's cruelty had forged them into something stronger. Mike watched from the dugout, his heart swelling with pride. He'd coached them to catch, to hit, to run, but today he'd taught them something more: how to stand up, how to heal, how to keep going. As the final inning ended, the crowd gathered around the team, their cheers a celebration of resilience. Thompson approached Mike, clapping him on the shoulder. "You did good, coach. Those kids won't forget this." Mike nodded, his eyes on Tommy and Lily, who were laughing with their teammates, their confidence restored. The field was alive again, filled with the joy that Karen had tried to steal. And somewhere, in the quiet of her own reckoning, Karen would have to face the truth that her words had consequences, that her cruelty had a cost, and that the community she tried to dominate had found its voice. The lesson wasn't just for Karen. It was for everyone watching, for every kid who'd ever felt small, for every parent who'd stayed silent too long. Stand up, speak out, protect what matters. The baseball field, once a place of conflict, became a stage for redemption, a reminder that even in the face of cruelty, courage and kindness could win. And as the stars began to shine above the field, the Wildcats played on, their laughter a promise that no bully could ever take their joy again.